Hi, my name is Travis Goldaddy, and I'll be discussing U.S. biofuel production. The vast majority of biofuels produced in the U.S. is what is called bioethanol. Bioethanol is simply any fuel that is derived from the fermentation process. Basically, what you do is you take simple sugars, which are contained in just about every crop, and ferment them into alcohol. This alcohol is called ethanol and is the same alcohol that is found in all liquor products. After the crop is converted into alcohol, it is then mixed into the gasoline and it is burnt as a fuel. In the U.S., the most common crop that is being used for biofuel production is corn, and we've been very successful in putting corn ethanol into our gasoline. In fact, nearly all the gasoline that is consumed in the U.S. is called E10. E10 means 10% of the fuel is ethanol, and the remaining 90% is normal gasoline. So, all the gasoline that is consumed in the U.S. actually contains the exact same alcohol that you would find in your local liquor store. Also, the vast majority of the ethanol that is found in the gasoline is produced in the U.S. and refined in the U.S., so it is a 100% domestic product. However, putting ethanol into our gasoline is a very recent development. This graph shows how we went from practically zero ethanol production in the 80s to nearly 15 billion gallons of ethanol produced in 2015. This makes the U.S. by far the largest consumer and producer of ethanol in the entire world. For example, the U.S. produces and consumes about 13 times that of Europe and about twice as much as Brazil. This makes bioethanol by far the largest renewable energy source in the U.S. and probably the world. The reason we started producing so much bioethanol was in 2007, a law was passed called the Renewable Fuel Standard. This law had two goals. One was to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and the second goal was to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, you have to remember, this was a time before all the oil shale and sands in the Midwest and Canada were discovered, and oil prices were near an all-time high. So this law was equally influenced by lowering gas prices and lowering emissions. The Renewable Fuel Standard set increasing goals of biofuel production and consumption in the coming years, so that by 2022 we would consume and produce at least 36 billion gallons of ethanol. As I've already shown, we are already producing a whole bunch of corn ethanol. However, as is shown by this chart, we are actually well behind the Renewable Fuel Standard. As of 2017, we're supposed to be consuming and producing 25 billion gallons of ethanol, and right now we're only at about 15. One of the major reasons we are falling behind the Renewable Fuel Standard is something called the blend wall. It turns out your average engine cannot burn more than a 10% ethanol and gasoline mixture without having maintenance issues. In order for your average engine to consume more ethanol, it will need to be modified. So unless if we are going to modify all the engines in the US, it is simply not feasible to consume more ethanol. This is why it is called the blend wall. Because of the blend wall and other issues, it is very likely that ethanol production in the US has already peaked. So even though we will probably never meet the production requirements as set by the Renewable Fuel Standard, there's no denying that the goal of limiting our dependence on foreign oil has been met, at least in part. So the next question is how environmentally friendly is bioethanol? Well, when bioethanol is burned, it produces slightly less CO2 than normal gasoline. However, it does produce more acid rain, so it's kind of a pick your poison. That being said, its slightly lower emissions is not the main advantage when using bioethanol. It is its net CO2 reduction over its lifetime that makes biofuels so appealing. This is called life cycle analysis. This is an analysis of the net CO2 being produced during harvesting, conversion into ethanol, and burning as a fuel, compared to how much CO2 the corn will consume over its lifetime as a crop. It is pretty well accepted that corn will consume more CO2 as a crop than it will produce when it is burned as a fuel. However, what the lawmakers did not take into account is that new cornfields would need to be planted in order to meet the new demand for ethanol. What this means is either old crops are being converted into corn, such as wheat into corn, or virgin land is being converted into crops. And depending on what was there before, the new crops could actually be much worse for the environment. For example, if a forest were cleared for bioethanol production, then it is nearly guaranteed that we would have been much better off just consuming gas. This is because a forest would consume so much more CO2 than a cornfield ever would. On the other hand, if we were converting arid land into corn production, then it is probably great from a net CO2 production standpoint, although there are still other issues with this. This idea is called change of land use analysis, and it's a very controversial topic, even to this day. The reason it is so controversial is because it's completely unknown what land is being changed to what for bioethanol production. To properly figure this out would require a massive audit of the entire ethanol industry to figure out what changes have been made in order to meet the ethanol production. So far, this has not been done, and I don't think it ever will. And until a study like this is completed, we will not know what changes in land use have been done and if ethanol production is indeed good for the environment. My name is Travis Goldaddy, and this was my short presentation on bioethanol in the U.S.